Hello, welcome to the March 2018 edition of Astronomy for Everyone. My name is Dr. Timothy Day. You may notice that I am sitting in the host's chair tonight, usually occupied by Don Clazier. Sometimes I get to do this when Don is out of town for different reasons, but tonight we don't have to look so far for Don. He's actually our expert guest for the show this evening. Welcome, Don. So glad to have you here.
Glad to be here. A little bit different viewpoint from this chair.
Is it? How do you feel sitting over there?
Pretty good, Tim. Pretty good.
Okay, good. So tell us a little bit about what we're going to have you share tonight. What is it that you'd like to let us know?
Well, we're going to be talking about sky lore and constellation of the sky, the mythology of the constellations and sky lore. Typically, we just hear about the Greco-Roman, which is our tradition, what's come down to us here in the West. But there are other cultures that really can look at the same group of stars and see something totally different. So in the program, we'll start off with the familiar,
Yes.
the Greco-Roman, and then we'll head over into other cultures and what their view was of these same group of stars.
So you're going to remind us about what it is we learned growing up and what we commonly see in the story that we tell each other about it in Western civilization as we tend to think of it. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to sort of take us for a tour around the globe in terms of different cultures, different times, and how did they see the same stars that we look at, but with stories that made more sense for them.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so since this is the spring show, we're going to be covering not only some spring constellations, but we're also going to talk about the northern sky, which from our part of the northern hemisphere we can see all the time. So we're going to plug it in here in this first of 4 shows that we'll be doing throughout the year.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. Where would you like to start out tonight?
Well, we're going to start off with Leo the lion, sort of the harbinger of spring, if you will. The lion itself, the story in the Greco-Roman version actually is identified with the Nemean lion, okay, a lion that was created by Jupiter and sent down to Earth. This lion was very savage. It killed whatever it wanted, whenever it wanted to.
Oh my.
And so the people of this area, the Nemean Valley, which is where the lion got its name, needed to do something.
Right.
Well, enter Hercules. Right. Big, strong hero. Yes.
All powerful.
Yes. Now, Hercules performed 12 different tasks or labors, if you will. And his first one was to kill the Nemean lion that we can see in the image from a Greek vase right there.
You can see them wrestling with each other.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, the lion's hide was impenetrable. You couldn't shoot it with an arrow or kill it with a sword. So what Hercules did, he waited for the animal to charge towards him. And when he did, he reached up, grabbed him by the throat, which you can kind of see there,
Right.
and then strangled him. Now, the story goes that it took 30 days to accomplish this, which coincidentally is the amount of time that it takes the sun to travel through the constellation. So is there a tie-in? Probably, but we don't know for sure.
Right.
So that's the basic story that we have. But other cultures, actually in this particular case, the theme of the lion is almost universal. For instance, in Mesopotamia, Sumer and Babylon, they called it Urgula, which meant the great lion. And even in other cultures, in Persia, it was Shir. In Syria, it was Aryo. And even in India, Simha. And all of these words translated as lion.
So this is an idea that seems to span not only different cultures, but times as well. I mean, some of the names you gave out, Mesopotamians and the Syrians, those go back many, many thousands of years.
Exactly.
Even predating the Greeks and the Romans themselves in some instances.
Exactly. These stories sort of migrate through cultures and across time. And it's interesting to note, too, that even in ancient Jewish history, the lion was the tribal symbol for Judah.
Okay.
They used that symbol, and even more recently, in the 20th century, when Ethiopia had an emperor, one of his titles was the Lion of Judah.
So this was a really universal theme. Lions actually used to roam a much larger territory on Earth than they do now. We think Africa for lions, or at least I do. But at that time, they were everywhere, all the way into Europe even. And so everybody knew the lion. And when they looked up in the sky, they had a story to go with that.
Exactly. And this also has a masculine bent to it for Leo.
A lot of strength, and Hercules and the lion being impenetrable.
Exactly. Now, our next constellation, Virgo, is the other side of the coin. In many cultures that we take a look at, it has a feminine nature to it. In the Greek story, it represents the goddess Dike, who was the goddess of justice. She was the daughter of Zeus and Themis.
She held the scales of justice.
The scales and blindfolded, exactly.
Okay. And now, we still see that outside our courtrooms today.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Now, she, at the beginning, lived on Earth with mortals. Mm-hmm. And this was during the golden age of humanity.
All right.
When men lived as brothers and there was no war and people grew their crops and everything was good.
Yes.
Well, over the generations, this morality started to decline and was typified by the different ages. Started at gold, then went to silver, and then bronze, moving from a better metal down to more base metals.
More base metal.
And eventually, the conflict between men got so great that Dike said, I'm leaving here. I'm going to go head up into the sky. And so she became the stars of the constellation that we know as Virgo.
Okay. And we can see that on the screen there.
Exactly. Now, for the Romans, this was the goddess Ceres, the goddess of agriculture and the harvest. And their story went like this. Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, and her daughter, Proserpina, very beautiful young woman. Well, Pluto, the god of the underworld, is looking for a bride. He comes up to the surface of the earth, takes Proserpina, takes her back to the underworld. Ceres is distraught. She doesn't know what to do. So she declares that until her daughter is returned, she is not going to let any crops grow. So this is an issue.
It's a disaster, famine.
Exactly, exactly.
The end of everything.
So Ceres goes to Jupiter and says, can you do something? So Jupiter goes to Pluto and he says, release her. Pluto says, no. So now this gets even
worse.
The crisis mode, because if there's no crops, people are going to starve, and if there's no people, who's going to worship the gods?
Ah.
Okay, very self-serving here on Jupiter's part.
So the gods need us as much as we needed the gods.
Yes. So Jupiter proposes a compromise. For 6 months, Proserpina will be with her mother. At that point, Ceres is happy, because Proserpina is with her. Crops grow, things thrive, everything's wonderful.
And this is the feminine concept coming through. This is rebirth, a time of renewal.
Exactly. Okay. Then for 6 months, she spends that time with Pluto in the underworld. So that is winter, or a time when crops don't grow.
Death, cold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for the Romans, this explained the seasons. I mean, they didn't know about the tilt of the Earth's axis and all of that. They had to have an explanation, and for them,
this was a mental model that allowed them to explain how things worked.
Exactly. And continuing with this feminine nature of rebirth and renewal, in Sumer, we see carved into stones a goddess called Shala that holds a shaft of wheat in her hand. In Assyria, she's Beltis, the wife of Bel. In India, she's known as Kanya, and she is actually the mother of Krishna. So even with the Romans, the shaft of wheat, the harvest, as a matter of fact, Spica, the brightest star in Virgo, that translates as ear of corn or ear of wheat, however you want to
So there's a theme that you just find repeating itself through the cultures, for starting in Sumer and moving all the way through the Golden Triangle and then to the Greco-Roman times, and now to even us today.
Today, exactly, exactly. Okay. So our third constellation is maybe not as well known as the first two. The first two are actually two of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. This one is Corona Borealis.
Which means the northern crown? Is
exactly,
that
the northern crown. Yeah, there is a southern crown too, by the way.
All right.
But this is the northern crown. And the Greco-Roman story ties in with Princess Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos of Crete. Okay. Now, every year, Athens had to send tribute to King Minos. They tried to rebel. He squashed the rebellion, so he demanded tribute. So every year, Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete, where then King Minos would put them in his labyrinth, from which there was no escape because you couldn't find
He had a
out.
huge maze,
Exactly.
enormous maze.
Exactly, that's exactly what a labyrinth is.
Okay.
In that labyrinth is a monster called the Minotaur. And as these people are wandering around trying to find their way out, the Minotaur finds them and eats them. So this is not a good thing. Okay, this is a problem.
A fate to be avoided.
Right. So one year, the king of Athens' son, Theseus, says, I'll go. Being a great hunter, he figures he can slay the Minotaur. Doesn't know how he's going to do it, but he's going to do it.
Right.
So they get there to Crete, and as they're getting off the boat, Ariadne sees Theseus. Theseus speaks to the king and extracts a promise that if I kill the Minotaur, you're going to let us go. King says, sure, thinking he'll never do it.
Not going to happen.
Right. So, but Ariadne's fallen in love with him. She gives him a sword and a ball of yarn just as he's ready to enter. So the yarn will unroll as they go in so they can follow it back out, right? So anyway, Theseus meets up with the Minotaur, slays it. They find their way back out.
Using the yarn.
But he's thinking maybe Minos is not going to honor his promise. So he and his compatriots, along with Ariadne, who wants to go back with him,
Right.
Commandeer a boat and set sail for Athens. Okay. They stop on an island called Naxos to rest for a couple of days. Theseus is thinking, maybe this isn't a good idea to bring back the daughter of the hated king of Crete with me. Okay. So while she's asleep one day, they all sail off and leave her there. Okay. She is distraught. Bacchus sees her, comes down, offers to marry her. First she repulses him, but he's such a nice guy, eventually she says yes. As a wedding gift, he gives her a gold crown with 7 diamonds in it. Which is great, except soon after they marry, she dies. And in his grief, he tossed the crown with the 7 diamonds up into the sky.
And there's the corona. There's the crown we see
crown.
today.
Mm-hmm. That's our story. Now, a Native American story by the Shawnee basically talks about the celestial sisters who come down from heaven in a basket, dance around the basket, making this big circle, which a native hunter, Whitehawk, sees. He sees the beaten circle but doesn't see a path to it. So he's curious.
How'd this happen?
Well, yeah, how does this happen? I mean, there should be a beaten path. So he waits around, sees this basket come down, sees the maidens jump out and dance around. He tries to grab one to be his bride, take her back to his village, but they all jump back into the basket and up into the sky. So he figures, I'm going to disguise myself as a rabbit. Okay? I can stay close to them. They won't suspect. They come down the next day. He hops closer. As soon as they jump out, he turns back into a human, grabs the most beautiful princess, carries her back to his village.
Right.
Well, she becomes homesick. And while he's out hunting one day, she builds herself a basket, jumps into it, sings a chant, and goes back up into the sky. Unfortunately, she doesn't get back to the other 7 sisters. She ends up as the star Arcturus in the constellation of Bootes. So it changed the constellation from a circle.
Now you've got a crown. You've got the gap there.
Exactly.
And on that note, we're going to end the first half of our show. Along the bottom of your screen, you'll see an email address that you're free to copy down. We really encourage people to use it. Reach out to us. We love to be responsive to the community. If you're interested in learning how to do things, how to be involved in the astronomy community locally, we're delighted to hear from you. And now we go to Term of the Day with Steve Whitty.
The term for this episode is spring. Now, in the United States, spring starts with the equinox. It's a kind of a mathematical thing, and we covered this in a term on this show in October 2012, which you probably remember if you're a longtime viewer, but you could refresh yourself on YouTube. The equinox is usually between March 19th and March 21st. It falls in that range, but this year it's March 20th, 2018, which is a Thursday. Now in Ireland, they do spring a little differently. Spring starts on February 1st. Now I've heard some hand-waving that China's seasons start 6 weeks earlier than the United States seasons. But it's way more complicated since China uses a lunar calendar. Now, for many birds, spring has activities like migration. It starts that way, and it is filled with mating and laying eggs and raising the young. The early bird, and so on. But how early? Well, some birds optimize it differently, but red-tailed hawks arrive in Michigan and can be seen in pairs as early as January. That's term of the month, spring.
Welcome back to the second half of our show about how different cultures around the world see the spring constellations. Our guest continues to be Don. Don, why don't you pick us up where we left off in terms of the next constellation?
Well, next we're going to go to the northern sky. And the most predominant constellation is, of course, Ursa Major, or the Big Dipper, which is part of the Big Bear. The Greco-Roman story involves a young woman named Callisto. Jupiter sees her, falls in love with her. She bears him a son named Arcus. Now, Juno finds out about this and is quite upset.
Juno was his wife.
Yes, right, is the wife of Jupiter. She's very upset. She comes down to Earth, tells Callisto that she is going to take away the beauty that she used to seduce her husband, going to turn her into a bear. So, for years after, Callisto roams the forests as a bear, while her son Arcus grows up to be a strong young man and a fine hunter. One day, Arcus is in the forest, sees a bear. He's ready to shoot it. Jupiter, though, is watching what's going on, realizes that that's really his mother. He comes down to Earth, changes Arcus into a bear, then picks them up and throws them up into the northern sky.
Mother and son, both as bears.
Together.
Ursa is the
yes,
bear.
Right, in the Latin for bear. So that's the basic Greco-Roman story.
Okay.
Now, for the Big Dipper part of Ursa Major, there's a story told by a Native American tribe known as the Kiowa.
Yes.
And their story centers around 8 children, 7 sisters and their brother. Well, they're all outside playing one day. All of a sudden, their brother starts to shake and tremble. His hands turn into claws. He's covered with fur. All of a sudden, where the boy was, there's a bear. The girls start to run. They're screaming and running away, and the bear is running after them. Well, as they're running, they come up to the stump of a great tree, and the stump speaks to them and says, "Climb on board." So they hop up on top, and just as the bear starts to reach them, the stump starts to rise up into the sky and growing taller and taller. Well, the bear is trying to reach up and grab them to kill them,
Yes.
but he can't reach them. And so as they go up into the sky, the 7 sisters, not to be confused with the Pleiades, but these 7 sisters become the 7 stars of the Big Dipper.
Of the Big Dipper.
A related story from other tribes in the Great Plains and out west was that it was a giant rock that the brothers climbed up on. It was 7 brothers and a sister. And as the rock rises up into the sky, the bear is trying to claw at it. Doesn't reach them, but it's the bear's claws that makes the striations, and that's how they explain the creation of Devil's Tower in Wyoming.
Ah.
Yeah.
So there's a common theme of transformation. Things shift from human to bear, or from ground-based to sky-based.
Exactly.
Things are constantly in motion.
Supernatural
Occurrences.
Now, in Egyptian lore, we see the Big Dipper shown on the wall of King Tut's tomb. We can see it right here. You can see the shape held by the individual on the right. That is the new pharaoh. On the left is Tut's mummy. The Big Dipper, as a tool, is called a meschetchel, and it is used to open the mouth of the mummy to restore the breath of life, to give the mummy eternal life, and so he can continue his work going forward up into the heavens. And especially with the Great Pyramid at Cheops, there's a shaft that points up from the king's burial chamber, pointing up to Thuban, which back in the day was the North Star.
Ah,
And Thuban is the brightest star in our next constellation, which is Draco the Dragon.
so the light from the star Thuban, the North Star at the time, could literally go all the way through the wall of the pyramid into the king's
Down
chamber.
this shaft into
What
the king's
an
burial
amazing-
chamber. And then he could also
Yeah.
rise up through this shaft, go up to the stars, which is where you would have his eternal life in the stars.
Remarkable.
Our last constellation is Draco the Dragon. Okay, that's the Western tradition, and Draco is the guardian of the golden apples of the Hesperides. Okay, this was a tree filled with golden apples given by Juno to her husband Jupiter as a wedding gift.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't want the apples stolen, so she has Draco stand guard. He's always awake, ever
He's a
vigilant.
fierce dragon.
Very fierce dragon. His breath is poisonous. His hide is impenetrable. Okay, he's going to guard the apples.
Okay.
Well, another one of Hercules' labors is to get the apples. Okay, but nobody can get close except for Atlas, who stands nearby because he's holding up the sky on his shoulders. A familiar sight to many people. So Hercules hatches a plan. He makes a deal with Atlas. Okay, he says, "I'll hold up the sky for you if you'll go and get the apples," because Draco will let him come close. He says, "Okay." So Hercules is holding up the sky. Atlas goes and gets the apples. He's supposed to bring them back to Hercules. But Atlas is going, "Wait a minute, this is pretty good, not having to hold up the sky." So now Hercules is kind of left holding the bag, sky, actually.
So to speak.
Right. So he devises a plan. He tells Atlas, "Would you mind just holding the sky for just a minute so I can get a pad and put it on my shoulder? Because it's really, kind of uncomfortable." Atlas, even though he's a god, not the brightest bulb in the pack, says, "Sure." So he's holding the sky.
And Hercules is out of there.
grabs the apples, takes off, and there's Atlas holding up the sky once again. To punish Draco, Juno tosses him up into the northern sky where he will always be on guard.
So that's yet again another example of people looking around in their world, having the stories about how things work, and then projecting that up into what they imagine they see in the sky.
Exactly. Even for the ancient Egyptians, they saw Draco as a hippopotamus that held the stake at the North Star, which is then, as we mentioned before, was the star Thuban in Draco.
Another reference. Thank you so much for taking us on this tour. This has been a delightful way of looking at our sky from a perspective that we don't normally talk about, and that's a real treat. I enjoy your fund of knowledge. You're very excited about it. I'm looking forward to our next show very much. Thank you for your time this evening.
You're welcome, Tim, and I'm looking forward to it as well.
I want to thank Don once again for being our guest this evening, and you will notice that the web site is across the bottom of your screen. Please do visit it. There's a wealth of information there. Once again, feel free to reach out to us. And now we're going to Steve Whitty with What's Up in the Sky.
What's up in the night sky for March 2018? The month of March, on March 20th, we have the spring equinox. In the northern hemisphere, of course, the fall equinox in the southern hemisphere. The sun rises between 7:08 in the morning to 7:17 in the morning over the course of the month, and it sets at 6:23 p.m. to 7:58 p.m. Now, the other thing that I like to talk about is the astronomical night or astronomical twilight time, and that is an hour and 33 minutes before and after sunrise and sunset on every day. March starts on the 1st with a full moon. So get ready, we're going to talk about that other full moon in a second. The third quarter is on the 9th. The new moon, which you don't really see, is on the 17th. The first quarter is on the 24th. And then on the 31st of March, we get another full moon. So this is another blue moon, if you will, the second full moon of a calendar month. March 15th is kind of interesting for Mercury. March 15th has the maximum eastern elongation. Let's go back to the solar system. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, we have the Earth, the Sun, and Mercury. It's really kind of hard to see, but that is almost a right triangle. So Mercury, from the perspective of Earth, is as far away from the Sun as it gets. So then, back to the night sky, Mercury. Mercury is, runs from Aquarius to Pisces over the month. It sets from 7:11 p.m., which is just a little bit after sunset, to 8:04 p.m. by the end of the month. So it's better later in the month, but it's also best on March 15th, being farthest from the Sun. Mercury is magnitude minus 1.2. It's pretty bright. It's a pretty decent month, I think, to see Mercury. Venus is nearby. Venus goes from Aquarius, same constellation, to Aries. It sets from 7:18, which is just a little, it's a little higher, a little farther from the Sun, to 9:33 by the end of the month. It's quite a ways from the Sun. It's best at the end of the month at magnitude minus 3.8. It is very bright. Uranus is in Pisces, as usual. And it sets from 10:04 to 11:14 over the month, and it's best at the beginning, at the end of the month, magnitude 5.9. You might just see it naked eye, but it's going to be really tough. Jupiter is in Libra, rises just after midnight, 26 minutes after midnight to 11:20 over the course of the month. Better at the end of the month, magnitude minus 2.2 is pretty bright. Saturn is in Sagittarius, rises 3:55 in the morning to 3:03 in the morning. So we're still on the 15th of the month in these scenes. Best end of the month, magnitude 0.5, so it's still brighter than most stars. Pluto is in Sagittarius also, where it's always been, almost. Rises at, from about 5 to about 4 in the morning. Magnitude 14.3, I think you need a 10-inch telescope for Pluto. Neptune has a superior conjunction March 4th. You're not going to be able to see Neptune this month, so just forget it. And that is what's up in the night sky for March 2018.